Hi, guys. Welcome to another Monday night study. We've been going through the timeline prophecies. We're doing a prophecy study. And what we did is we started off looking at the calendar and the dates. Almost all prophecies have certain things that happen. Sometimes they'll tell you it'll be before or after something else. So you can kind of string them together. Rarely do they have a date attached to them. So I had only known about 3 timeline prophecies where an actual date is given. And then this last year, going through the Dead Sea Scrolls, I discovered a fourth. So let me just real quickly show you what we've been doing. So this is our timelines or prophecy studies for 2024 on YouTube. And we've only got 5 things in there at the moment. And we're doing number 5 right now anyway. But the first one was the timeline prophecy determining the biblical years. You can go back and look at these, but we basically talked about, according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, what year is it today? How far do we have to get to the year 6000? The idea of the ages, the millennial reign, things like that. So then going forward with what we know today, then we looked at part 2, which was how we got the AD 32 date. And then part 3 was the AD 1948 date. And part 4 is the 1967 date. So it's surprising because I will talk to different people and say, well, Israel was supposed to come back as a state. Well, yeah, it's just a coincidence. The United States made it happen. But then when you plug in the fact that it happened on the date prophesied, it wasn't just some time. It wasn't even sometime in the year 1948. The date was given, and it was fulfilled to the day. And people get really mad when you say that, especially people that want to say they're not really Jews, they're something else, we're the real Jews. But we didn't go back and create the state of Israel in 1948. So that presents a problem to certain people's theologies. Anyway, so it's really interesting to me. So a date is given. So the Messiah was supposed to come and die in 32. Israel was supposed to be reborn in 1948. And in 1967, they were supposed to take back the Temple Mount, but not build a temple. We've talked about those. And there's this code in Daniel that they use to get it just right. Otherwise, it's give or take, a couple of years or something, which is still interesting. But the code is really interesting. So today we're going to look at the timeline prophecy in that. So let me bring this up and we'll just get started. So here's our timeline prophecy. This one has a date set of 2026, or depending on how you do it, 2027. Something happens in those years. And no, it's got nothing to do with the rapture. It'd be nice if it was rapture was before that even. But this is something specific about Israel. So let's look at this. So we have looked at the 3 passages in Daniel, and we used Daniel's code basically to calculate the times, because it was an event plus so many days is another event. And that's what we looked at. This will be the same way, but this is not from the Bible. It's from a Dead Sea Scroll. So this particular timeline study, the text we'll be using is usually called the Jeremiah Apocryphon. Apocryphon is it's a cross between 2 words, apocrypha meaning secret, hidden, or maybe even fake or dubious, and like a prophecy book. So it's like a dubious or a fake or a questionable prophecy book, that kind of a thing. So it's probably misnamed. Rather than Jeremiah actually giving a prophecy, which apparently somebody does, it could very easily be called the Jeremiah commentary. But this is the name that was given to it. Once they noticed there were extra biblical prophecies, they just threw it in that category. But you'll see that all the way through the commentaries from the Dead Sea Scrolls on the major and minor prophets. Fascinating study. But this is specifically 4Q 384 to 390. And again, the way this works is if it has a Q in it, it's from the area of Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls proper were found. There's been 12 caves where they have found something, some sort of writing. And this is from cave 4. So 4Q would be the 4th cave in Qumran. And these are fragments number 384 to 390. So that's what that means. But this way you can look it up and see what it is. Now, we have actually written a book on this. Probably ought to show that here real quick. We come back to here. And if we go to our Bible Facts website, we go to our, no, not that one, the store actually. So here, this is the latest book we have, Ancient Prophecies from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is actually from that book. And what it does is it shows you all the commentaries. Let's see if I can bring that up real quick. Sometimes they have problems. Okay. Yeah, they quit doing that. Okay, anyway, it'll have commentaries from all of the prophetic texts, the commentaries on the major and minor prophets, on Isaiah, things like that. And then it will also have secondary texts that are all prophetic. So this is from what I would call the Jeremiah commentary. The reason I bring that up. So the Jeremiah Apocryphon, or the Jeremiah commentary. So this is a particular piece of it. So let's start at this. Now it's going to talk about a 70-year period. So your first thought is Jeremiah, 70-year period. He's the one that prophesied the 70-year period in Babylon. So your first thought is we're probably talking about that. But then we notice something different, basically, that the 70 years is inside of a time when they come back, which could still fit, but it's at the end of days. And then there is a Jubilee, which is a 50-year period that is inside this 70 years. So they may be completely inside or connected somehow, but the idea is that they're connected somehow. And inside of that 50-year period is that 7-year period that occurs right before the establishment of the kingdom. So with that in mind, we're talking about whenever the tribulation starts. That's a 7-year period. That's going to be inside of some Jubilee, which is a 50-year period. And this 70 years touches that in some way. It can't be inside of a Jubilee because it's 70 instead of 50. But the Jubilee could be either completely inside the 70-year period, which apparently it's not, or part of it is. So we'll get to look at this. And this is actually pretty short, but I think it's fascinating. So this says, fragment number 1, before me, and again I shall deliver them to the hands of the sons of Aaron for 70 years. So the people come back or go into captivity. We haven't figured that out yet. But when they do, they leave where they're at, they go somewhere else. And they're under the jurisdiction of the sons of Aaron for 70 years. Now, my first thought is that would be priests, but they weren't really under priestly guide in Babylon. We see from the scriptures there is the kings that are still ruling. So in some sense, the sons of Aaron, the priests, the government, something like that. But they come back from somewhere, and it's a 70-year period. Again, your first thought is Babylonian captivity. And there's no 70-year period after they come back from Babylon. But it says, and the sons of Aaron will rule over them. So this sounds like self-rule, at least, however you interpret sons of Aaron. But they're not being ruled over by Babylonians or someone else, or scattered abroad. They've come back apparently in their land, and they're being ruled by their own people. So they're their own sovereign nation. So the sons of Aaron will rule over them, but they will not walk in my ways. Now remember, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, walking in the ways of God is morality, and it's also staying away from idolatry like Moloch and all the old gods that the pagans worshipped. But it's also understanding and walking in the knowledge of Messiah. And their concept, and we've seen this many times from 11Q13, that the Messiah would be God incarnate. He would come to die for our sins. He would come and die one Shemitah after the end of the 9th Jubilee of their Ona, which turns out to be, again, another 32 AD reference. And I say that it's give or take a year. I mean, so if you wanted to say it has to be 31 or it has to be 33, Maybe the calendar's off slightly. And I don't really care, because give or take a year, we've pinpointed the Messiah. Give or take a year, we've pinpointed the establishment of the kingdom of Israel. Give or take a year, we've pinpointed the exact date of the taking of the Temple Mount. Now, since they're in recent times, 1948, 1967, specifically May 14th and June 7th, are rock solid in our history. And so we can figure those out and go forward. This is something like that. So it says, they will not walk in my ways. So they may be moral, and they may not be moral. They may be worshiping God only, or they may be pagan, worshiping Baal and Moloch or whatever. Or they could be moral and following God in a traditional Jewish sense, but not being messianic. They don't understand the Messiah, which is what's prophesied in many other places. It's probably what we're talking about here if we're talking about end time prophecy. So it says, they will not walk in my ways, which I command you, so that you may warn them. So whoever's writing this, Jeremiah or something, is supposed to write this down and warn them about that. We see all through the other scrolls the warnings about Levites' kids way up the line when Messiah actually comes, that they would crucify him or actually kill him. Something to do with nails, actually destroying the Messiah, rejecting him. So, and then that was a warning to all those that would listen. So it says, and that's a good point for us too. Today we have a society, and our society tells us this is right and this is wrong. This is politically correct and this is incorrect. This is moral and this is immoral. And they have their own way. So maybe like here in America. So if I went to Spain or France or Germany or somewhere else, the morality is probably fairly close, but there are some major differences in the societies. So the question is, what would the correct system be? And that would be one that the Lord is specific about. So sometimes our society gets off and tries to tell us we should or should not do a certain thing. And as a Christian, we're always polite, but we say, I'm a Christian, and we are forbidden to do those things. Well, yeah, but this is an extenuating circumstance. You have to do this, or someone's life might depend on it. And usually that's not the case, but the answer is still no. So they're supposed to warn them because society gets off. And they will do this, or they will do what is evil in my eyes, like all the Israelites had done in the former days of their kingdom, except for those who will come first in the land of their captivity to build the temple. So there's a group of people, and remember, they're not being ruled over by Babylonians in this 70-year period. We're trying to figure out where the 70-year period is. And they are self-ruling, but they're having problems like they do most of the time, not like it was when they first came back from Babylon to rebuild the temple, right? So this is not a 70-year period of Babylon, and it's not the 70-year period right after when they come back. So this is different somehow. It's a different 70-year period. Okay, and it says, I will speak to them, and I will send them commandments, and they will understand everything which their fathers had abandoned. So somewhere along the line, there will be at least a group of them that become messianic. And we're seeing that today, the messianic movement, I think mainly from the scrolls. So we're looking for this 70-year period. Notice what it says. We'll look at the second part of this. From the time when the generation comes to an end. Well, what generation? And again, if we back up, we're talking about when they come back from somewhere and they establish self-rule. And it's not right after Babylon. So that would have to be sometime after 1948, or if you want to call it 1917, or sometime in our time period. They come back and they form a self-rule of some sort. So from the time when that generation comes to an end and the self-rule actually begins, that would be probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 1917 to 1948, somewhere in there. When that comes to an end, in the seventh Jubilee of the deliverance of the land. So apparently they have been somewhere not in their land and not under sovereign rule. But now they're back apparently in their land with sovereign rule. That has to be, again, either in 1948 or 536 BC. And they're not doing everything or being messianic in the way that they did when they came back to build the temple the first time. So we're talking about 1948 time period. Okay. And it says in the 7th Jubilee. Okay, great. So we stop there and we go back and we look at the calendar. So let me bring that up for us here. So here's our Dead Sea Scroll calendar website. And what we've done in this is figure out the unas and the ages. So real briefly, there are 4 ages, basically. The first 3 are 2,000 years apiece. The last one is 1,000 years. The first age is called the age of chaos, or the age of creation. The second one is called the age of Torah, and it's from Abraham's time to the death of the Messiah, or actually the destruction of the temples, the Messiah's first coming. And then after that, the third one is called the age of grace, and it's from the Messiah's first coming to the Messiah's second coming. And then the kingdom age is the fourth one, which is only 1,000 years. We would relate the millennial reign to that. That's from the Messiah's second coming to the establishment of a new heavens and a new earth. That's their basic calendar. So in each age of 2,000 years, there are 4 onas. An ona is 500 years apiece. In each one of those, there are 10 jubilees. And then, so we can figure that out. A jubilee is 50 years, 50 times 10 is 500. So if we go back and we look at this, the prophecy, let me just collapse this again, says, in the 7th jubilee of the deliverance of the land. So sometime when the land is being delivered, or has been delivered, something like that, in the 7th jubilee. Well, if we're talking about 1948 forward or something like that, we have to look up, it's in Ona 12 on their calendar. So if we come down here to Jubilee number 7, that's this area right here, and we see in Jubilee number 7, we had the Balfour Declaration in AD 1917. So Jubilee number 7 actually goes from 1876 to 1925. That was a 50-year period, and it was Jubilee number 7. And that's what we're wanting, right? Did I say that or not? Yeah, 7th Jubilee. I was thinking 6 for some reason. So somewhere in here, the establishment of the Jewish nation for sovereignty is declared, and they're supposed to go back to their homeland. And it would have taken place except for the people in the area not wanting it, and then political problems, and then eventually a World War II, which, messed everything up. And then after World War II, they actually came back and they had already basically established something, but they were under British rule. So remember, 1948 was after World War I, and the British were given the mandate to carve up Palestine and reform it in a democratic way to get it away from Sharia law and the Ottoman Empire. So break it up into their individual places again. So, and then the Balfour Declaration was to take part of that land, or the entire land of Palestine, actually, which is what it was called back then, cut it in half, and the half actually is the Jordan River. The one half was going to be called Transjordan. That was going to be a home for the Arabs, and the other half was going to be called Israel. Well, there was no name for it. The Jews would name it once they decided, but Israel or Judah or whatever, but a homeland for the Jews. So there was a 2-state solution in the entire area, cut in half, one half for the Jews, one half for the Arabs. And so that's the way it goes. And now we have basically 2 or 3 other pieces wanting not a 2-state solution, they call it that, but it's actually a 3, 4, and a 5-state solution. So anyway, but that's what's going on. This is the Balfour Declaration that happened. So it's in Jubilee number 7. So it's interesting to me that this would begin or end here. That's the end of the generation that sees the return begin. And it does fit with what we saw happen. So now if we go on, when this generation comes to an end in the 7th Jubilee of the deliverance of the land, they will forget statute and festival and Sabbath and covenant. Most of the Jews over there now are still secular. There's a group of dedicated rabbinic Jews. There is a smaller group of Messianic Jews, and there's a lot of politics involved. And then they just have the customs, like they keep the Sabbath and they keep other things, but they're not, a lot of them are not Jewish per se in concept. I have a friend that lives in Israel, and he was telling this history one time about how he grew up. His father taught him everything was real. There was a Moses, all that's why we're here. We're Jews. We live here. So then he goes to the public school, and this is the public school in Israel, okay? And basically he was told it's all a bunch of myth. It never happened. And of course, his question would be my question too. Then why do we care? If the Arabs want the land, give it to them. If it's all fake, and just go somewhere else and live a nice life. Well, no, we're Jews. But why? Why would you want to be a culture that believes in a myth and dies for stupid fairy tales? So either believe or don't believe. But it was an interesting mix of, no, we're Jews, we belong here. But the reason we belong here actually never happened. So much like what they teach over here, I mean, some of the same ideas. So he began to say, well, okay, whatever. So they kind of brainwashed him into believing that there is no Moses or anything else. And then one day he was driving to work and he saw a sign out for an archaeologist that had discovered, or thinks he's discovered, Joshua's altar. And he kind of slammed on the brakes, pulled off to the side, thought for a moment. It's like, wait a minute. If there really is a Joshua's altar, there was a Joshua, which means there was a Moses, and I've been lied to. And so he investigated it, and sure enough, the altars still exist. You can see it today. So it's interesting how that kind of stuff happens. And then with the Dead Sea Scrolls, things like this, a lot of Jews are going from being rabbinic or Orthodox Jews into Messianic Jews. So it's very, very interesting. So let's just finish this part here. So when that generation comes to an end in the 7th Jubilee of the deliverance of the land, the 1917 era, that 7th Jubilee, they will forget the statute and the festival and the Sabbath and the covenant. They'll violate everything. They'll do what's evil in my eyes. Therefore, I will hide my face from them and deliver them to the hand of their enemies. And from this time forward, they're constantly fighting with Muslims that want to destroy them. Not all Muslims, I'm just saying pockets of enemies in the area and even inside of Israel. Constant turmoil, constant strife, infadas, and then wars with rockets and all, just constant, okay, during this time period or after 1917. But I will leave them among the refugees that they see. I shall leave them among refugees. That's interesting. So Palestinians or ancient Edomites. So they would not be so that they would not be annihilated in my wrath when my face was hidden from them. So he'll have problems to try to get them to wake up. He'll also have ways of them to live through it so that they won't be exterminated. Israel will not be exterminated after it comes back to 1948. It's not going to be kicked out of the land or obliterated or anything. And the angels of Masamot, which is another name for Satan, the angels of Satan, in other words, will rule over them. Not that they're satanic worshipers, but we have this demonic spirit over there where everybody's still trying to kill everybody. And I submit this to you. This is what I've said about the apostasy that was supposed to rise in the end days, even in the church. It's not that we believe, say I'm apostate and you're not. It's not that I believe a certain thing different than you. I probably believe a lot of things different, but it's not the different belief system. The apostasy is thinking that we're different on some area, and that is so important that I have to kill you. That's where it comes from. So when you're trying to kill Jews, Christians, kill Muslims, kill anybody, that's the great apostasy. If you believe that the difference in opinion between you and I is so great, one of us is going to go to hell, then do everything you can possibly do to convert me. Don't send me there anyway. Try to convert me so I don't go to hell. If you believe it's not a salvation issue, you can believe your way, I can believe mine, and we'll still both be saved, then why bother, period? So never do you want to kill anybody, but that's what the apostasy ends up doing. So anyway, so this happens. He says, and I will spurn them, and they will return and do what is evil in my eyes, and they will walk in the willfulness of their heart. They will continue doing it. Now, so far, all we've seen is Israel comes back in the seventh Jubilee and begins the process of the deliverance for the land. And we've seen that ends in 1925. So by 1925, the Balfour Declaration has been given. They're working on becoming a state, and probably would have by then, but it was stopped, and then there was a World War II. So the whole process is involved. So we're definitely talking about that time period. Now, this next section, fragment 2, there's several pieces to it. We're just going to look at the first piece where it's got the dates. It says, and my house, and in my altar, and in the Holy of Holies, something. Remember, these are fragments, so we're not sure. So it's probably talking about they come back in their land, and then they're supposed to build the temple, but they probably don't. That would be like 1967 when they do something like that. And so it was done. For these things will befall them, and there will be the rule of Belial. Belial is another word for Satan, over them, as to deliver them to the sword for a week of years. So somewhere along the line, either inside or outside, we're not sure yet, but somewhere in the neighborhood of that 70-year period, which begins apparently sometime after the generation dies off, that establishes the return into the land in 1917. So somewhere after 1917, in other words, there's going to be a week of years. That's a 7-year period. Well, we know what that is. That's the tribulation period. So that's going to happen sometime, and it's got something to do with a new Holy of Holies, a new temple. But anyway, and we can't say much more than that because it's fragmented. But it says, and in that Jubilee. So what Jubilee? Well, in the Jubilee that contains the week of years. So again, if the second coming is here and you back up 7 years, that's that 7-year tribulation period. So no matter where that's at, it's inside of a 50-year period. And it looks like that 50-year period has something to do with that 70-year period. They're inside each other, either completely or at least partially. So this is interesting to me. That means the rapture, the tribulation, the second coming is not hundreds of years away. It's probably like within 50 years of that 70-year period. And that 7-week tribulation period, 7-year tribulation period, is inside that last Jubilee. Now, when we plug this up into a lot of other scrolls, we can understand quite a bit more. But just looking at this one, they will be violating all my statutes and all my commandments, which I've commanded them, and sent them from the hand of my servant, the prophets. So they should follow the prophets. We've talked a lot about the prophet Obadiah and his prophecies of what's happening right now. So again, that ought to wake anybody up. The ancient prophecies, the very specific details of what has happened this year and what is in the process for next year. So anyway, they will begin to quarrel among themselves for 70 years. So they come back in the Jubilee that's in the 1917 era. As soon as they establish a nation, sometime thereafter, there is a quarrel that starts, and it lasts for 70 years. And that's connected somewhere to the week of years and the Jubilee period. So we're all in there connected. So From the day, this is the key to figuring this out, from the day of their violation of the oath. So there's some sort of oath that they have. They gave an oath, they violated it. Okay. For the violation of the oath and the covenant which they violated. So I will deliver them to the hand of the angels of Satan, and they will rule over them. So if we pull all this together, what we're saying is sometime after 1948, they make a mistake. Now, most likely, as far as the covenant is concerned, they come back in unbelief, not understanding Messiah. So it's not like they accept Messiah and then they reject him, which would be a breach of contract. But there's something else. So the only other thing is probably land for peace type stuff. And if we go back and we look at the Old Testament, the Lord says, I put you in the land and I didn't wipe out the animals and the Amorites and the other stuff because you need to grow and expand slowly. If you were to wipe out your enemies, the animals would take over, or vice versa, if you had wiped out all the enemies. So you need to grow slowly. And so that's what's going on. But as you take control of the land you're supposed to control, if you turn around and give it away, that's a breach of contract. And then there'll be a 70-year period between the time they do something like that and the time that it's fixed. So that's what we're seeing here. So let's plug some numbers into this and try to figure it out. So calculation. They came back in 1948. There's no way that a breach can happen because they're just getting established. They haven't given up any land. They don't really have any land to give up. So they're just getting started. So, 70 years after that would be 2018, May 14th specifically, and nothing happened then. Of course, it couldn't. There's no breach. Now, in 1956, Israel, for the first time, took control of Gaza from Egypt, and that was during the Suez Crisis. And at that time, after the fact, they actually gave Gaza back to Egypt to rule, not self-governance. So that's the first time they took part of their land, their ancient homeland, and then turned around and gave it back. That would be a breach of contract. Okay? So if that's the one we're talking about, 1956 plus 70 years to fix that breach of contract, then the Gaza problem should be over. Israel should permanently keep the land of Gaza, and it would happen in 2027. If we're counting 70 years, actual years. We'll come back to that 360 thing in a minute. But it would specifically be August 31st, 2027. If that's what it is, and if it's actual years and it's consistent. Now, another possibility is in 1967, specifically June 7th, they took control of the Temple Mount. And then control was given back to the Muslims. The Jews are saying we technically own it, it's ours. But if you did and you were following the covenant, you would wipe everything off, nicely move the dome or whatever, but you would rebuild the temple. So to say, if you said they own it and we can't do anything about it, that's different. But if you say we own it and we could build the temple, but we don't want to upset our neighbors, so we'll just disobey God and leave it as it is, that would be a breach of contract. Okay? So if we're talking about that, 1967 plus 70 years would be 2037, specifically June 7th, that might be the rebuilding of the temple. Or taking, because if you take complete control of the Temple Mount, either with a war or the Muslims just say, forget it, you can have it. Just move our dome somewhere, and they pick up and they move the dome. So if you had control of the Temple Mount and nobody disputed it, there would be no reason not to build a temple. So that's the reason they haven't done it now, is because of the political problems. So it's something to keep in mind. So let's assume that's possibly correct, but there's no reason to use Daniel's 360 code with this, because this is Jeremiah, but it might be. So if you had a 70-year period and you did what we did on the other calculations, 360 days per year instead of 365, it's going to shrink it down a little bit. So if we did it that way, it's going to be not 70 years, but 68 years and 363 days if we use the calculations we've been. So if we did that, and we're talking about 1956, and then that's when they gave it back, and it was August 31st when the control was given back to Egypt in 57. And then the Temple Mount here in 67. So if you take those dates and put 68 years, 363 days in it, it would come back a little different, excuse me. So again, nothing happened August 28th of 2017. Okay. So 70 years from their establishment with the code involved, it would be 68 years. It would be August of 2017. No temple was built, no war was fought, so there's no breach of contract. Okay. But now 1956 plus the 68 years comes to 2026, specifically May. And that could very easily be the end of the Gaza-Lebanese war. Even if it ended a year before, sometimes it takes 6 months or a year to finalize the paperwork to give them independence back or set up a government or whatever the case may be. I don't remember, like in World War II. My father fought in World War II, but I don't remember how long it was from D-Day and DHJ, I forget what they call it, the surrender of the Japanese, for instance, and we went in and we restructured them and then let them go, gave them independence. I don't know how long it took to restructure the government, whether it was a few months or few years or whatever, but that's the kind of thing we're talking about. But to me, it's interesting that in 2023, the war with Gaza began, and then Lebanon stepped in. And it looks like it's following exactly the way Obadiah says it was to go. This prophecy says there's a 70-year period, and the first thing it could be is 1956, which could bring us to 2026 for an ending of the prophecy. Now, it will be fascinating to me to see if the war ends and Israel actually expands at that time period, or if it's a literal 70 years, not 68, it would be 2027 instead of 26. Incidentally, as far as the calendar goes, the year for March of 25, this is 2024. So from March of 25 to March of 26 is the Jubilee year. So that's the Jubilee year of this, which is the next to the last set of Jubilees, the 9th Jubilee. So then in 2026, March begins that last 50-year period, which the scrolls call the last generation or the last Jubilee. It's kind of interchangeable. And in that time period is when all the prophecies, or most of them anyway, would be fulfilled. We've already seen several. And if the Gaza-Lebanese war is part of that, we've already seen a good part start. If, however, it's like it has been the last 2 times, they win the war, organize stuff, turn around and give them independence back, and then 5 or 10 years later, we have to do the whole thing again. Now, I'm not sure we have enough time to do it all again. Thinking about a tribulation period at the end of the age, a rapture and things like that. Maybe we have time, maybe we don't, but either way, this is part of the stage that is being set. So, and then also, if we're talking 1967, June 7th, plus the 68 years, that would bring us to 2037 for a possible rebuilding of the temple. So either, again, this is out because nothing happened in that area, but it's either 26 and 37 or 27 and 37, something like that. And we're talking about, and possibly both, because there's a lot of parallels on that stuff. When the children of Israel were out for 70 years, there's actually 3 different ways of calculating it, and they're all 70 years apiece. So this could very easily be 1, 2, or even 3 sets of 70 years. But they'd start from a breach of contract and go forward to the time it's fulfilled. I just think it's amazing that we have this scroll telling us that, and it should end in 2027 or possibly 26. We're getting ready in 2 months to start 2025. There's no way the war would be over by then, especially if Iran gets involved, and you're talking about the proxies from also from Syria and Iraq, and who knows what, and Houthis in Yemen. So this is an interesting thing, but it's interesting that it's all coming to a head now, and it fits in perfectly with this prophecy. So we got to wait a year, year and a half, and see what happens with this. However, I know somebody's going to ask the question, how does this fit in with the rapture? And it doesn't. The rapture could be tonight, or it could be 10 years after this event, or who knows? It's just whenever the Lord does it. Then that's not unique to the rapture. Again, these are the dates that are set. There's only 4 to my knowledge, but there's probably a couple of hundred prophecies that happen sometime. And we're usually blessed if we can figure out this one happens before this one, so you can put them together in an order. So anyway, that's our study for tonight. And next week, we will continue our prophecy study for 2024 by going into some of the well-known prophecies or symbols. We'll start off with Daniel's image and then plug in Noah's dream of the same, so we can get an idea of the empires that are going on in this time period. We mainly just want to focus on recent history, recent being like 1948 forward, Israeli history time period, and this next to the last Jubilee that we're ending now, and see what comes out in the future. So, okay, we'll stop there, and I will go to the chat room, see if there's any comments or questions. Okay, so first one is, have you found any new info on the Essenes medicinal herbal practices? Not really much. I'm plugging in things from different ways or different aspects. For instance, they talk about a certain drug enzyme, whatever you want to call it. They'd call it something different, a different thing from a certain plant done a certain way. And all you can do is try to identify the plant or how they do something. And we backtracked because there is a possibility of Shem's herbal medicine book becoming part of the Chinese Herb Classic. And the Chinese Herb Classic looked occultic at first, but it's very specific. So, for instance, the Chinese Herb Classic has certain herbs that work really well. And one of the things was, though, it talked about crystals. So if you use them in conjunction with crystals, it works better. And the first time I read that, I would think, probably like you, that's a new age weird thing. Something's messed up in the translation. Well, it's not as bad as you thought. It actually is crystals, but we're talking about metals are crystalline in form, the ores. What they're actually saying is not like put crystals on your head and meditate or something. They're saying when you grind the herbs up in cast iron or copper or whatever kind of crystal or metal, in other words, it'd be a better way of translating it, it will cause it to break down a certain way. Certain enzymes will come out or be freed. Like we all know, for instance, if you cook in cast iron, if you have a light anemia, that'll fix it. As a matter of fact, a lot of ladies that have a lack of iron because of being on a menstrual cycle can cook in cast iron, and half the time it fixes it. They don't need a supplement. And likewise, when they stop that cycle, they need to watch, not necessarily cook all the time, in that they might get a little too much iron. So that's just an example. A little bit of the iron leaks into the food that you're preparing. So if you did it in iron or copper or anything else, and that's why everybody now is trying to stay away from aluminum, because if you're cooking in aluminum, you've got to be getting a little bit of the aluminum in the food. And now aluminum is thought to be one of the pieces of causing Alzheimer's. So, maybe drinking out of a pop can wouldn't hurt you, but if you cooked it in the pop can, or in the, So all those things are interesting. So there's a lot of things like that we found. And basically, they did a type of intermittent fasting. Their first meal of the day was around 11 o'clock in the morning. So they basically skipped breakfast. The other things were certain enzymes. So we've been able to identify things like penicillin, ivermectin, nattokinase, serrapeptase, um, and then other fermented foods, which would really help. So we've discovered how to do fermented garlic, which has turned out to be an amazing antibiotic, which doesn't have the side effects of regular antibiotics. We've had a lot of good success with it. We've been practicing or working on this stuff for a little bit over the last year or so. So I have been able to basically uh, almost completely get rid of my allergies. I still have a sneeze occasionally and a little bit of a eye problem, watery eyes if I get out in something. But all my friends, now I've had worse allergies than anybody I've ever known. And all my friends and family now have worse allergies than I do. I'm almost totally free of allergies. One of my great problems was walnuts. I was very, very allergic to walnuts. Now it doesn't seem to make a difference. I accidentally ate a walnut cookie thinking it was a chocolate chip cookie a ways back. No reaction. So it's interesting how these things will do that. So the vitamin D and things, you can try to figure it out, because if you had something that says eat tomatoes but don't eat pears or something like that, now today we can analyze and know everything in a tomato and everything in a pear. And if they're 90% the same, what are the differences? And you can begin to figure things out like that. So basically, we're just experimenting with basic herbal medicine, letting the scrolls guide us to kind of see what we can figure out. So far as the Book of Haggai, which is that actual book, there's no pieces of it. They talk about it a lot. So there's a lot of, yeah, get the book and do this, but no recipes or anything so far. So we do have our network, and I'll go ahead and mention that here, our network. And we do have an herbal medicine channel. This is from Mighty Networks. It's kind of like a Facebook where you'd have different channels. So we have one for prophecy, one for just general things, one for herbal medicine. We're working on that. There's not much there as far as a good formation of stuff. But anyway, so we're working on it. But there's not really a whole lot new. Super chat, $20. Thank you very much for the donation. Really appreciate that. Have you seen Janice Bacca's translation of the Scroll of Mysteries? Yes, I actually have a copy of that, which is the Hebrew revelation from John from Cochin. Have you heard about additional scrolls from them? Yeah, I have copies of John, Jude, Revelation, Matthew, Mark, and John. And from what I understand, most of the New Testament exists. Like, I think there's one scroll that has the Pauline epistles from the start up to like Ephesians or something. And then there's rumors about Peter and a few other things. So it's really interesting. I'm working on a translation of just Jude, James, and Revelation at the moment, but I've got through that and I've stopped because there's other things going on, but kind of working on it. It's got some really interesting things, especially Revelation. It's like 99% Revelation, just like you would think. And I don't think there's any missing verses either, but going through it, there's just little things that are different. Like the guy was asking about herbal medicine. It talks about in the tree of life at the end in chapter 20 or 21. It says that the tree of life, our translation says the tree of life, the leaves were for the healing of the nations. And you always got to wonder, is that metaphorical or what it is? In the scrolls, it says it's actually medicine, literally medicine. So it's interesting. There's just a few differences like that. And it's just really cool. We did a section on some of the Hebrew ones, I think 2 or 3 weeks back. Just some thoughts on a few pieces of it. So I will want to pull those together and eventually probably print them and everything too, but do some studies on them eventually. So yeah, she seems to be a really good translator. One of the things I like about hers is she does an interlinear, because when you're looking at it, I have to like draw on it and then come back and remember that verse was here, and then she has it in an interlinear form, which is really cool. So let's see, super chat $10. Thank you very much. Okay, the NAR, New Apostolic Reformation, and the Word of Faith people are rebuking hurricanes in Jesus' name. They declare that they are joint heirs with Jesus or little gods. I am am I unloving for calling them out as Gnostics and heretical? No, I would do the same thing. Um, again, it's if they have that power, stop it. They don't need to advertise it, just do it. And if they can't do it, then they need to shut up. And it's interesting how these false prophet people will come up and say, well, this is going to happen. And then something similar happens, but not at all what they talked about. But then they claim that, see, I predicted that. There's a lot of that stuff. There are real prophets, but a real prophet would not be hanging out in the NAR or the Word of Faith. They would know better. That's for sure. So you do need to do it in love. Don't yell at them. Don't cuss or anything, but just say that this is inappropriate. This is wrong doctrine. And it is, I mean, if you're pre-trib and I'm mid or something like that, we'll find out. It's not going to hurt anything for us to continue like we are. But if I'm leading someone into saying, just name it, claim it, throw your medication away, and that's it, I could get somebody killed doing that. And that's something that they don't, and the hurricane's the same way. No, don't leave, just go, I command you, and it'll be done. You're going to get somebody killed. So yeah, those are the kind of things you do need to call them on that, not to do that kind of stuff. Again, look at it from a practical way. If I had a spiritual ability or a machine to cause an earthquake or whatever that I could make that go away, well then do it. Don't tell anybody, just do it. And that's one of the ways where you catch all these false prophets. We have to remember that Elijah was a false prophet, and remember the miracles that he did. These people claiming to have power, show us, just do something, but they never do. Now, you understand though, if I had a whole bunch of people pray and say I'm not even a Christian, and I went, somebody is going to get well and somebody's going to get sick and die or whatever. I'm just going to pick the ones that happen to recover and claim that I did it. So that's, we got to be very careful on that kind of thing. Now, some people would do that knowingly, and we call those con artists. Okay. The false prophets are usually people that are not so much a con artist, but they're self-deceived. They really think that they have this power, and when it doesn't work, they conveniently forget about it. So hi, Dr. Ken. Some will say the Antichrist will be of Western origin, like Rome. You mentioned north of Israel, so how does that work? Rome seems to be, and I could be off on this, but my theory is Rome is part of the great apostasy, or the what's called the harlot religious system. It's not Roman Catholicism in general. Gad seems to indicate that Roman Catholicism and Islam, or part of Roman Catholicism and Islam, like break-offs, something like that happens and they form together to form, for lack of a better word, something like Chrislam. That might be actually it, growing up. But that's what's prophesied, but that's the religion. And the religion is what the Antichrist uses to come to world power. And as soon as he comes to a place where he's completely in control, he turns on and destroys Chrislam, or whatever that is, completely destroys it, sets up his own religion. So there'll be yet another religion after that. So that's all from Revelation and from Daniel, specifically Daniel 11. We've got that information. So a lot of people tend to mix those up. I knew one lady that claimed to be a prophet, again, false prophet stuff, said that, who was it? It was either Trump or Obama, somebody. One of the presidents was the Antichrist, and that we are Babylon. It's like, no, the Antichrist comes after and destroys Babylon. So it could be a country rather than just a religion, like Rome, Italy, or whatever. But if you're the king of a country, you don't raise an army and come and destroy your own country. You do to become the king, but if you're already king, you don't do that. And so it's like, theoretically, the United States could be Babylon, but if it is, the president's not the Antichrist. Or if the president's the Antichrist, we're definitely not Babylon. You can't be both. There's no way. So this all started because we're told to look for 10 nations that come together to form an alliance. And we've never really had that until the European Common Market kind of came together back in the 80s. And we were all excited thinking, oh, this is it. This is the 10 nations, the beast system. It's here, And then it fizzled and fell apart. Well, first it expanded to, I think, 27, then it fell apart. So obviously that's not the one. There could be lots of 10 nation things. I don't know of any others. But like right now, there's the G10. Some people think that could be. It's a 10 something, so keep an eye on it. That's the only thing I can tell you. But if they expand to 13 or if they fall apart or whatever, then that wasn't them. But it seems to be that. And in Daniel 11, it talks about the king of the north and the king of the south, which is the Assyrian area and the Egyptian area, the old empires. There's the king of the northern empire, the king of the southern empire. And that's why it talks about Libya, Egypt, and Sudan coming against the Antichrist. They represent and I just realized this the other day, the 10 toes. We always say, well, those are 10 toes as part of the Roman Empire. No, they're partially clay and partially iron. Iron is the Roman Empire, clay is the old Egyptian Empire. So if they're partially one and partially another, there could be a country that was not in the Roman Empire that was in the Egyptian Empire, or vice versa. There might be one that was only in the Roman Empire that was not in the Egyptian Empire. So we got to be real careful at the teachings on that. And the more we go over it, the more we begin to realize more and put more together. And of course, as time goes on, we begin to see real prophecies take place. So yeah, I'm not saying that means he's a Muslim or anything else, because Chrislam will probably be the thing at the time, and he will be that, or whatever it is. You know how politicians are. What are you again? Okay, I'm one of those. That's what I am, until they get in a position of power, then they could care less and they wipe you out. We have politicians like that. Will come and tell me they're a Christian or they're this or they're that. Would you please vote for me? And then they get in office and they never do what they said they were going to. So, you know the type. So that's what happens with the Antichrist. So we need to remember that the Babylonian mystery religion is a religious system, probably headquartered in a country, but it's controlling commerce over there. So Babylon, Rome, whatever. If Turkey was still in control, I would, Turkey is a possibility. It's north of Israel, that kind of stuff. But there's another prophecy that talks about when the 10 nations, with the Antichrist, attacks Babylon, Turkey sides with Babylon. So this tells us, number one, Turkey is not one of the 10 nations. Turkey is also not Babylon, because you don't side with yourself. So it's just things like that. There's a whole bunch, and that's in a scroll. That's not in the Bible. But again, if these things are real and we pull them together, we can see a cleaner picture. And these are sometimes quoted by the church fathers too, so they believed in them. So it's just things, but we do have to remember things outside the Bible could be wrong. There could be mistranslations in anything. So we have to be careful with that. But yeah, it's we just have to look for 10 nations of something, and wherever there's a set of 10 nations. But it should be a revival of the Egyptian kingdom and the Roman kingdom somehow, the clay and the iron. So, and we'll look at that next week when we look at the image and kind of study that a little bit better. I also listened to one of your videos on the Essene health, and it's been other, or has there been other findings on how they stayed healthy? It was insightful. Thank you. Not more than what I just mentioned. The things that I'm mentioning now, I'm guessing on. You know, like I said, if it says don't eat apples but eat peaches, today I can actually figure out what all is in each one of them, what's different between them as far as enzymes and stuff, and maybe we can figure something out. So it's kind of like backwards engineering the stuff. So, but in what I have done, my health's a lot better. My son's health's a lot better. So anyway, it's pretty interesting. I'm going to keep looking though, because I would like to live to the rapture and see everything. With all the anti-Semitism around, there is a lot of speculation about the synagogue of Satan. Did the DSS shed any light on who Jesus was actually speaking about in Revelation? Yeah, I think so. I haven't really pulled it all together yet, but looking at the Revelation that's in Hebrew, it gives a different twist on it. Not enough to identify it, but it's a different twist. So basically, you can be non-Jewish and claim that you are in several different ways. Number one, back then, the Pharisees and Sadducees were biologically Jewish, but they were not religiously Jewish. They're going to tell you that theirs was the true religion, but they're actually a cult. So think of like if everybody in the United States was Christian, and somehow think of a denomination you know of that is a full-blown cult. Not they claim to be Christian, but they are just a cult. They kill people and all sorts of weird stuff. And somehow they took over the federal government. Well, that's the same situation as what you would have in 70 AD. The Pharisees and the Sadducees took control of the government, said this is it, and it was horrible the way they murdered people. And then if you read the accounts of what happened in 70 AD, it's pretty amazing. So they are definitely the synagogue of Satan, and they definitely had an apostasy, not only from the law of Moses, wanting to believe something and be different, but to kill you if you disagreed with them. So it's that kind of stuff. Now, on the flip side, I'm a Gentile, but I could claim that I'm more Jewish than the Jews because I believe in Messiah and they don't, and they're doing the rituals wrong or whatever. So we have that today in like the Hebrew roots movement. Not all of them. Some of them are decent people wanting to study the festivals. But anytime you get a group saying that we're doing it better than the Jews and we need to make the Jews convert or just get rid of them, seems like that's where it always kind of comes to. I've had other Jewish friends come up to me and ask me what I thought of the Hebrew roots movement over here, and I said it's just a form of anti-Semitism, and they're like, yeah, it's actually scary. It's getting big enough that it's scaring some of the Jews, because that's how it always starts. That then the pogroms start, the persecution, the anti-Semitism, the I don't like you and cuss you out stuff is one stage, but then churches or synagogues get burned, little things happen to some people, and then pretty soon the next thing you know, Jews aren't welcome in the cities, and then pretty soon they're exterminated. And it just, to me and to you and me, we've lived here in America for 50 some years, that seems ridiculous that anybody would do that, or it could go that way that quickly, but it actually can. That's why here in America, we're supposed to band together. We're supposed to preach the gospel. We're supposed to carry weapons just to make sure our family's safe. So, those kind of things. So there's that, and then there's other ideas on the Dead Sea on that. But basically, anybody that says the Jews are out and we're in, or the Jews are over there aren't really Jews, they're part of a Kazarite kingdom, and either we're the real Jews or someone else is. Anything along those lines is the start of a synagogue of Satan type thing. Violation of the oath, known as ketubah, covenant with God. Yes, a ketubah would be that kind of a thing. A ketubah and a shitrei ursine are two different parts of the covenant when you get married. You know, the first one about I will marry her later, and then when you actually do the ceremony, there's the second part. But yeah, that's a covenant, and it could be spiritually known because we're the bride of Christ. So that would be a good analogy of that. So but the thing about that, they can't be the messianic stuff because they didn't come in messianic, then violate their oath by leaving messianic Judaism and becoming something else. You'd have to violate the oath, so you have to enter into it and then come back out of it. So the only thing I'm thinking of is land for that kind of thing. There might be something else involved. That would be interesting to see. Good evening, family. I had this answer before, but I can't find where I'd written it. What is the difference between our calendar and the calendar used 2,000 years ago when Jesus was resurrected? Well, okay. The Gregorian calendar, the Roman calendar starts off with being kind of revamped and everything by Julius Caesar, and this was in 46 or 48 BC. And then that was just the Roman calendar or the Julian calendar. We continued it up into the Middle Ages and we realized it wasn't absolutely perfect. And we had gained like, I think, 11 days in the year. And so then they changed it. So what it was originally is once every 4 years, there's a leap day. Okay. But that gave us too many in time. So then they added every 400 years, there is not a leap day. Except when that 400 years ends on a century or a millennium or something like that, then there is one. There's a couple of things like that. Most of that stuff will not happen again in our lifetime. So, but that's the only difference. As far as that goes, it's January 31st, and the names and the numbers and all are the same. Now, as far as the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, you can look at our YouTube channel and look all about that. But the original calendar is solar. The new year starts at the spring equinox, just real briefly. There's 12 months, 30 days each. And then there are 4 tekufas, which are the solstices and equinoxes. They're the division of the days in between summer and fall, for instance, and fall and winter. And so when you add those, it's a 364-day calendar. So that means everything replicates perfectly. New Year's is always on a Wednesday, and it's an excellent calendar. And if you know it and you read the scriptures, you instantly know when things were, how close they were to the Sabbaths and the holidays, and you can begin to see why people are reacting the way they did. It's like, well, yeah, because you just all of a sudden know all this stuff. So the calendar is amazing. And then what we were looking at with the Onas, you can begin to see patterns of prophetic patterns in history by looking at it. But that's basically it. Oh, the thing that was confusing is like we have a leap day once every 4 years. They have a leap week once every 5 to 6 years to keep everything, and then that keeps the weeks intact. Because the most important thing on our calendar is to keep it synced as close as possible to the spring equinox. And the spring equinox is always March 20th, almost always March 20th on our calendar. The most important thing on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is to keep the Sabbaths straight. And so the weekdays, the 7-day weekday, cannot be interrupted at all. So it has to fit perfectly inside the months and inside the years and that kind of a thing. So that's the main difference. Do you think the church can hold the Antichrist back? past an appointed time if we pray in unison and take authority? No, I don't think so. I think what's going to happen is just the fact that we're here, and if we stand up, or just the fact that some of us will at least, when they do weird things in our schools, we bark. We're not going to allow that. Not illegally, but we're going to do something, run for the school board, change something. We're going to pull our kids out, teach them ourselves, whatever the case may be. Local government, if necessary, we'll get in, we'll vote, we'll do whatever. Someone comes along and says, you have to do this. No, it's illegal. We're not doing it. And when there's enough people that say no, that's enough of a problem to hold things back. Now, the second that we're all raptured, it's a totally different ballgame, and the Antichrist will be able to do whatever he wants. So I don't think it's so much that we're holding him back because of praying or commanding him or anything like that. Just the fact that we're here. There's enough of us, and I hope more of us get involved and try to nicely, gently push back on ungodly things, and that in general will push back the Antichrist. Don't take a mark on your hand. Don't be forced into taking anything that you don't want to take. You make the decision for yourself. And I think you guys know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of things out there like that, and more things coming. And we have to start saying no. But I think that's basically what that is. Gifted 5 memberships. Oh, thank you very much. Again, I appreciate you guys, your support. I heard the 7th Jubilee begins spring of 2026, 5786. How does this fit with the possibility of Israel taking Gaza within the 70th span? Well, number one is that's a totally different calendar. This calendar shows the date. I can bring that up here again too. Let me go back here to this one. So if we look at the DSS calendar site, so like right now, this is in Israel, it's already Tuesday, but it's October 8th, if it's Tuesday, 2024. So the Dead Sea Scroll date for 2024 is 5949. The modern Jewish calendar is the 5785. And there are some, not Dead Sea Scrolls, but there's some Jewish writings from the 2nd century that tell us who and why those dates were changed. This is actually the original date, and 167 years were deleted from the calendar for a specific reason. That's mentioned in detail in the Seder Olam. So basically, when you look at something like that, a lot of people set dates with that kind of a thing, but if the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is right, and I wasn't there, so I don't know really, but I lean toward the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. So according to it, there's a Jubilee period every 50 years. The last year is the 50th year. It's a Jubilee. And so that's what we're getting at. So if this is 5749, next year is the Jubilee year of this cycle. And then we begin a new Jubilee period for the following one. So anyway, that's how we could look at that. So the question is, which calendar is correct? Obviously not the Gregorian, but the Dead Sea Scroll calendar or the modern Jewish calendar. Super sticker, $50. Thank you very much. Yeah, I probably should mention we've got the donate button up there, but we also have our second channel, forgot to mention this, which is our manuscript channel. And our manuscript channel is going to be not me teaching, but just the scrolls read out loud. And then, of course, we got the text in the back. So my son's doing the editing for that. We want to take all of these scrolls that we talk about and put them out there for people to have. So you can listen to my teachings and you can go over there and just listen to the scrolls. Just like if the site was King James Bible, Genesis to Revelation, you could go there and listen to it all. So that's the kind of thing we're wanting to create with that second channel. And it's linked on the website and on the first YouTube channel. And then we have our network, which we mentioned before, if you want to join it and talk about stuff. No censorship. except when I do it. I mean, if you come in and start arguing and teaching something that's blatantly satanic, you're out. We've had it for like 3 years, and I think we've kicked like 4 people out for causing problems. But you can come in and say, I don't believe this, I believe that. What do you think? Honest discussion, whatever you think. Just don't, try to do anything weird. So and then of course, our Give, Send, Go is where we get a lot of our support from. And so that's a PayPal alternative. We have PayPal too, but those are those things. So really appreciate all the things you guys do. And okay, we just did that with the $50. Thank you very much. And then, do you think that the Masonic Freemasonry group is the synagogue of Satan? I don't think they were, in a sense, but I don't know like how they've changed or whatever. It seems like a lot of groups like that do work for the community and do whatever might be okay. But no matter what we're talking about, all of those things, and I think a lot of the churches are all drifting toward this apostasy. So if they start talking about you're okay, I'm okay, it doesn't matter. If they're talking about you're a Baptist and I'm a Calvary Chapel and we have some differences, but it doesn't matter, that's true. But if they're talking about all religions are the same and nothing really matters, then there's a problem. So, and of course, it all depends. So, yeah, it might be something that we would want to stay away from. I mean, in a sense, we have the best club of brothers and sisters ever, you know. So, super chat, $20. Thank you very much for the donations. Is it possible that Josephus was an Essene? I've heard he was at Masada, and I've also heard that some of the Essenes were there. Okay, am I connecting the dots improperly? I don't know for sure. See, to say that you were up to be the next priest just means biologically you were Jewish and from Levi. So it doesn't mean that you were or were not a Sadducee, a Pharisee, an Essene, or one of the other groups. So it's a possibility. So it is interesting when the Romans were besieging the temple, trying to destroy it. It was because of the really bad situation. And at a certain point, Josephus just picked up and left, went out and surrendered to the Romans, and basically said, I have nothing to do with these guys, And it was Titus actually that read the works of Josephus, his history, and said, this is so good, I'm going to mass produce it and give it out to my people to read about the history. So he was very well favored by the Romans. And that just goes to show you, it's like we might believe differently, but if I can trust you with my family, my kids and stuff, and not to stab me in the back, we can have discussions. We can be brothers. You can like chocolate and I can like vanilla, but it's this weird, I've got to make you convert. I've got to hurt you. I've got to kill you type stuff that is, that was going on in the temple. It got really, really bad. So I don't know for sure, but he was an interesting guy. The way he actually talked about Jesus, I thought was interesting. He may have been a believer, which means he may have been in a scene to understand it that way. What are your thoughts about Jonathan Cahn's dragon prophecy? I actually have not read it. I've heard a little bit about it, but I don't know anything about it, though. Sorry. And okay. Well, let's go ahead and stop there for tonight. Well, again, we'll come back next week and we'll start doing some more general stuff and trying to pull some of the prophecies together. So far, we've understood that there's a date set for the Messiah's first coming in 32 AD, for Israel's second return in 1948, for Israel taking back the Temple Mount in 1967, and it looks like a 70-year prophecy somewhere. If we set the date properly for the beginning, we should know what's going to happen, and it should have something to do with Gaza and Lebanon and that type of stuff, and it should end in a year and a half. And that might be the war continues that long or it's stopped, but then there's the carving up or redoing of something or negotiations that take a while. It'll be really interesting to see what happens. And I'm not being a prophet, I'm just showing you a text. So if I'm interpreting it wrong, nothing will happen in the next couple years. So we'll see what happens. And I think this is a good example of people speculate and use strange math to make things fit. And hopefully the rapture will be next week. And Paul said, nothing beyond that which is written. And I think that's really important for us to know. Speculate on written things like this. This is something, or 666. That really does mean something. So try to figure that out. So those kind of things. Looks like another one popped in here. So one last question. Have you ever looked at the meanings of the list of names in 1 Chronicles 24, the governors of the sanctuary? It will make an interesting story. I can't put it all together. I have looked at it a little bit, but I haven't. It seems like I remember Chuck Missler did something like that. And I might be thinking of some other thing, but it's always interesting to look at the names because you get um, inscription prophecies that way in several places in the Bible. So those are fantastic prophecies to look at. So, okay. All right. Well, I will go ahead and say good night, and we will see you guys next week. God bless.